My brother-in-law leaned back in his chair, swirled his wine, and said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. Sophie deserves better than a man who still checks price tags at the grocery store. Everyone laughed. My mother-in-law covered her smile with her napkin. My father-in-law nodded slowly, like it was the most reasonable thing anyone had said all evening. My wife sat beside me, her hand going still on the tablecloth, and I watched her jaw tighten the way it does when she's deciding whether to say something or let it pass. She let it pass. I picked up my fork and kept eating. My name is Ryan. I've been married to Sophie for 4 years. For most of that time, her family has believed I'm a quiet guy who manages a small property consulting firm, drives a used pickup, and probably can't afford the zip code they live in. They're not entirely wrong about the truck. I do drive a used pickup. I just happen to own the 6-story commercial building where my brother-in-law's marketing agency has been renting its entire 3rd floor for the past 3 years. Every month, his company wires $14,800 in rent directly into one of my LLCs. He has never once connected the name on the lease to the man sitting across from him at Thanksgiving dinner. Tonight was his engagement party. His fiancée was lovely. The house was decorated. The wine was expensive. And somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, my brother-in-law had decided that the best way to celebrate his own happiness was to remind everyone at the table that he didn't think much of mine. I wasn't angry. I was curious. I wanted to see how far he'd take it. He took it pretty far. "I'm serious," he said, setting his glass down. Sophie spent 2 years in London. She had options. Real options. He glanced at me. "No offense, Ryan." "None taken," I said. "I just think family has a right to say these things." My father-in-law cleared his throat. "Derek. Dad, come on. We're all thinking it. He runs some little consulting thing. Sophie has a master's degree. She could have." "Derek." My wife's voice was quiet, but it cut through the table like a blade. "That's enough." He raised his hands. "I'm just being honest. You're being embarrassing," she said. "And you're doing it at your own party, so maybe think about that." The table went uncomfortable. Someone asked about the wedding venue. The conversation shifted. But I caught my mother-in-law watching me with that particular expression she's worn since the first time Sophie brought me home. Not cruel, exactly. Just evaluating. Like she was still waiting for the moment Sophie came to her senses. I smiled at her. She looked away. After dinner, my brother-in-law found me on the back patio. I was standing by the railing, looking out at their backyard, and I heard the sliding door behind me and knew by the footsteps it was him. He handed me a beer. I took it. "Look," he said. "I wasn't trying to start something in there." "I know," I said. "It's just Sophie's always been the one who had it together, you know? Top of her class, picked up French in like 8 months, could have gone anywhere. And then she just settled here." "Settled for?" He stopped himself. "For me," I finished. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it?" He took a long drink of his beer. "I mean, you're a fine guy, Ryan. I'm sure you're a fine guy. I just wonder, sometimes if you understand what you have. Like, do you have a plan? A real one? Because Sophie's not going to want to be in that apartment forever. We own the apartment building we live in." "I didn't say that." "I have a plan," I said. "What kind of plan?" "The kind that doesn't need to announce itself at someone else's engagement party," I said, and went back inside. He didn't follow me. On the drive home, Sophie was quiet for 10 minutes. Then she said, "I'm sorry about him." "Don't be. He does this every time. He's been doing it since we got married." "I know." She turned to look at me. "It doesn't bother you?" I thought about the lease agreement in my filing cabinet. The one with his company's signature on it. The one that renewed automatically every 18 months and had just renewed 3 weeks ago. "No," I said honestly. "It really doesn't." She studied me for a moment the way she sometimes does, like she's trying to read something written in a language she almost speaks. Then she turned back to the window. "You're strange," she said, but she was almost smiling. "You married me," I said. "I did," she said softly. "I really did." Here's the part I never told her. I built my first real estate LLC at 24, 2 years before I met Sophie. I'd spent 3 years before that doing property management for a development group in Austin, learning every corner of commercial leasing, zoning law, tenant negotiation. I was not flashy about it. I didn't go to networking events. I didn't post about it. I found undervalued commercial properties, structured quiet partnerships with 2 investors I'd met through a mentor, and I let the assets build. By the time Sophie and I got serious, I had partial or full ownership stakes in 4 commercial properties across the city. The Aldrin building on Kessler Street was the crown jewel. 6 floors, renovated in 2021, full occupancy within 14 months of relaunch. One of the first tenants to sign a long-term lease was a growing marketing agency called Vertex Creative Group. My brother-in-law had founded it 2 years earlier. I didn't know that when the lease was signed. My property manager handled tenant acquisition. I reviewed the paperwork, saw the company name, saw the numbers, signed off. It wasn't until 3 months into my relationship with Sophie that she mentioned her brother ran a marketing firm downtown, and I looked up the address, and my stomach did something strange and quiet. I thought about telling her. I went back and forth on it for weeks, but we were new, and I didn't want her to think I was making it about money, and I didn't want her family's first impression of me to be filtered through what I owned. I wanted them to see me, just me, the person. So I said nothing. 4 years later, her brother was still calling me a grocery store man at dinner parties. I kept saying nothing, but things have a way of surfacing. 6 weeks after the engagement party, my brother-in-law called me directly. Not Sophie. Me. He'd never done that before. I stared at his name on my phone screen for 2 full rings before I answered. "Hey," he said. His voice had a different texture. Something careful in it. "Hey," I said. "So I'm calling because something kinda weird came up and I figured I'd just ask you straight." "Okay." Our lease renewal came in and I was going through the LLC documentation with our accountant, and there's a management company listed, Caldwell Property Partners, and I Googled it and there's not a lot out there, and then I found a registration document, and he paused. "And your name is on it." I let the silence sit for a moment. "Yeah," I said. Another pause. "Longer this time. So you own our building?" 48% of it, I said. "There are 2 other partners." He didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear him breathing. "How long?" he finally asked. "You've been a tenant since 2022, I said. "I've been a partial owner since 2020. "And you never said anything?" "No." "To Sophie?" "No." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about every dinner, every sideways comment, every time his mother looked at me like I was a phase Sophie was passing through. I thought about the engagement party and the grocery store remark, and the word settled said out loud at a table full of people who nodded along. "Because I didn't want any of you to know me through what I own," I said. "I wanted to see who you were when you thought you had nothing to be impressed by." Another silence. Then, "Does Sophie know?" "Not yet," I said. "I think she should hear it from me." He hung up without saying goodbye. I drove home, walked through the front door, found Sophie on the couch with a book. She looked up. Something in my face must have landed differently than usual because she put the book down immediately. "What happened?" she said. I sat across from her. I told her everything. Not in pieces, not easing into it, all of it, clean and direct. The LLCs. The Aldrin building. The lease her brother signed. The moment I discovered the connection. Why I'd kept it quiet. What I was trying to see. She didn't speak while I talked. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and listened to every word with a stillness that I've only seen in her a handful of times, the kind that means she's processing something very deep. When I finished, she was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said, "The building on Kessler?" "Yes. Derek's been in that building for 3 years." "Yes. And every month his company pays rent to my LLC." "Yes." She put her face in her hands. Not crying, just the gesture of someone recalibrating everything. When she looked up, her eyes were clear. "Ryan, I know. You let him talk to you that way for 4 years. I wanted to know who he was," I said. "I wanted to know who all of them were. Without the money in the room?" She looked at me for a long time. "And now you know?" "Yeah," I said. "Now I know." She was quiet again. "Then, were you ever going to tell me?" "Yes," I said. I needed it to be real first. You and me. I needed to know it was built on something that had nothing to do with balance sheets." She stood up, walked to the window, and stood there with her arms crossed, looking out at the street. I waited. I've learned to wait with Sophie. She processes sideways, not head-on, and the best thing I can do is give her the space to get there. "You could have told me," she said finally. "I would have kept it." "I know that now," I said. "I think I knew it earlier than I admitted." "So why didn't you?" "Because your family made me feel like a footnote from the very beginning," I said. "And I needed to know that you didn't." She turned around. Her expression was complicated in a way I couldn't fully read. "I never made you feel that way." "No," I said. "You never did. That's why I married you." She uncrossed her arms. Something shifted in her face. She walked back across the room, sat down beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. "My brother is going to lose his mind," she said. "He already called me," I said. "He found out through the lease documentation." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Of course he did. He's going to tell your parents. Obviously. Are you okay? She turned her head to look at me. Are you kidding? I'm furious at you for not telling me sooner, and also somehow incredibly proud of you, and also I don't totally know what to do with any of this. She paused. But yeah, I'm okay. I reached over and took her hand. What do you want to do? I asked. She thought about it. I want to be there when you tell them. My mother-in-law called Sophie the next morning. My brother-in-law had told them. I don't know exactly what he said, but based on the length of the call and the sound of my wife's voice through the door of our home office, I gathered it covered most of the main points. Sophie came out after 40 minutes, set her phone on the kitchen counter, and looked at me. My mother wants us to come to dinner on Saturday, she said. To talk? That's the word she used, yes. I nodded. Okay. Derek will be there. I assumed. Ryan. She paused. Don't be quiet this time, okay? You've been quiet long enough. I looked at her. Yeah, I said. I know. Saturday dinner was in the formal dining room. That alone told me something. My in-laws had a perfectly comfortable kitchen table that fit 8 people easily, and every relaxed family dinner happened there. The formal dining room with the long table and the chandelier was for occasions. For statements. My mother-in-law had cooked. My father-in-law sat at the head of the table with the specific posture of a man preparing to mediate. My brother-in-law sat across from Sophie and me, and he looked like someone who had spent 3 days working out how to be in a room with me and hadn't quite solved it. We ate. We made small talk about his fiancée, who had wisely declined to attend this particular dinner. Then my father-in-law set down his fork and looked at me. Ryan, he said. Help me understand. What would you like to understand? Why the secrecy? Why 4 years of, he gestured vaguely, allowing us to believe one thing when the reality was different? I set my own fork down. I didn't lie to you, I said. I told you I ran a property consulting firm. That's accurate. I just didn't detail the scope of it. That's a fine distinction, my mother-in-law said. I think it's an important one, I said. My brother-in-law leaned forward. Do you understand how this looks from my side? You've been my landlord for 3 years. You sat at our table every holiday and let me. He stopped. Let you what? I asked. He looked at the table. Say things. Yes, I said. I did. That's not normal, man. That's... What is it? I asked. Because I've been trying to find the right word for it. What would you call sitting across from your sister's husband every Christmas and making sure he understood that you didn't think he was good enough for her? What word covers that? The table went quiet. Derek has opinions. My mother-in-law started. He has a pattern, Sophie said. Her voice was steady. And you both let it happen. Every single time. My father-in-law shifted in his chair. We wanted the best for Sophie. My mother-in-law said. So did I said. That's why I married her. Silence. I'm not here to make anyone feel bad, I continued. I'm here because Sophie asked me to be here, and because I think it's time we stop operating in the version of reality where I'm the man you need to protect her from. I looked around the table. I own the Aldrin building. I have 3 other commercial properties and 2 residential complexes. My net worth, if you want the number, is enough that your son's rent is genuinely not something I track closely. None of that is why I married Sophie. But all of it is real, and it was real when you decided I wasn't worth taking seriously. My brother-in-law rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. That was the point. So what was this? Some kind of test? Not a test, I said. An observation. I wanted to see the people my wife came from when they thought they had every advantage over me. When they thought they were doing her a favor by being skeptical of me. I paused. Now I've seen it. My father-in-law was quiet for a long time. Then he said, and what did you conclude? I thought about 4 years of dinners. 4 years of careful comments and evaluating looks and the slow accumulation of being treated like a problem Sophie hadn't yet recognized. I thought about my brother-in-law's voice on that patio. The word settled like a verdict. I also thought about the times my father-in-law fixed my car without being asked. The birthday card my mother-in-law sent every year without fail, always with a handwritten note even when the note was short. The way my brother-in-law had, 2 years ago, driven across the city at midnight because Sophie called him when I was in the hospital for a kidney stone, before he knew it wasn't serious. He'd sat in that waiting room for 2 hours. People are more than their worst behavior. I concluded that you love Sophie, I said. And that love makes people afraid. And afraid people do clumsy things. I looked at my brother-in-law. I'm not going to hold it against you. But I needed to stop. He met my eyes for the first time all evening. He nodded once. It was small and it wasn't an apology in words, but it was something real. My mother-in-law looked at Sophie. You knew nothing about any of this? Not until last week, Sophie said. And yes, I'm annoyed about that. He knows I'm annoyed about that. She glanced at me. We're handling it. Are you all right? My mother-in-law asked her. Sophie's expression softened slightly. I'm married to a man who spent 4 years just wanting to be loved for himself, she said. Yeah, Mom. I'm all right. The dinner didn't end with a celebration. No one hugged it out. My father-in-law refilled everyone's wine without saying anything, and we talked for another hour about ordinary things, careful and a little fragile, the way a room feels after something heavy has finally been put down. But when we left, my brother-in-law stopped me at the door. The lease renewal, he said. Same terms? I looked at him. Same terms, I said. Derek, I was never going to use it against you. That was never what this was. He looked relieved in a way that he tried to cover. Okay. I do want one thing to change, I said. What's that? Next time you want to know about my finances, I said, you can just ask. He almost laughed. It was a small sound, barely there. But it was real. On the drive home, Sophie was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Lighter. She had her elbow on the window and she was watching the city go by. How do you feel? I asked. Tired, she said. But good tired. Like after a long run. Yeah, I said. My mom is going to need time. That's fine. Derek is going to be weird about it for a while. I can live with that. She turned to look at me. Ryan. Yeah. For what it's worth, she said. I never thought you were a footnote. I kept my eyes on the road. I know. Did you, though? She asked quietly. Because I think part of you wasn't sure. Part of you needed to run the whole experiment just to be certain. She wasn't wrong. She is frequently not wrong about things like that, which is one of the reasons I married her. Maybe, I said. The apartment we live in, she said. Do we own that building too? I paused for just a beat too long. Ryan. We own the building, I confirmed. She turned back to the window. Oh my God. The rent we pay goes to the same LLC that. I'm going to need a minute, she said. Take your time. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, and I could see from the way her shoulders were moving that she was trying very hard not to laugh and not entirely succeeding. So for 4 years, she said, every time I complained about the landlord being slow to fix the heat. I'll look into that, I said seriously. She did laugh then, fully, and it filled the car. And I felt something that had been held tight in my chest for a long time come loose and drift. You are such a strange person, she said. You keep saying that, I said. Because it keeps being true. She reached over and put her hand on my arm. I love you. I love you even though you are absolutely unhinged. I was going to tell you, I said. I just wanted to make sure first. Sure of what? That when you found out, it wouldn't change the thing that matters. She was quiet for a moment. Which thing? The way you look at me, I said. I needed to know it was going to be the same. She squeezed my arm. She didn't say anything else for a while, and she didn't need to. I knew the answer. That was 3 months ago. Things are different now, but not in the ways I expected. My brother-in-law still has a lease on the 3rd floor of the Aldrin building. Last month he texted me about a water pressure issue in the 2nd floor bathroom, and I sent the maintenance team within the hour. He sent back a thumbs up emoji and then, after a pause, a second text that said simply, good to know who to call now. It wasn't an apology. But it was an acknowledgement. In some relationships, that's the version of the door opening. My mother-in-law had Sophie and me over for brunch 2 weeks ago, just the 4 of us. My father-in-law showed me his tomato plants in the backyard and asked me genuine questions about commercial real estate for about 40 minutes. I answered all of them. At one point he said, quietly, without looking at me directly, I think we underestimated you. I told him I understood why. He nodded. We went back inside. Sophie and I had one real argument about the secrecy. A long, honest one that lasted most of an evening and ended with both of us clear-eyed and exhausted and closer than we'd been before. She told me she felt like a variable in an experiment she hadn't consented to. I told her she was right and that I was sorry. I meant it. She told me that going forward, if I had information that affected our life together, she needed to know it. I agreed. We shook on it. Which made her laugh, and that was the end of it. The truck is the same. I still drive it. Sophie has stopped pointing this out because she's figured out by now that the truck is not a financial limitation but a preference, and that I find something clarifying about driving a vehicle that nobody looks twice at. I don't need people to look twice. I never did. I just needed one person to look directly. She does. She has from the beginning. That was always the whole point. The building on Kessler has a rooftop I've never mentioned to anyone in her family. Small terrace. Faces east, Catches the morning light in a way that I've always thought is genuinely one of the better views in the city. Sophie and I went up there last Saturday with coffee and sat on the ledge with our feet hanging over nothing, watching the city do what cities do. She asked me if there were any other secrets. I thought about it carefully and honestly. No, I said. You have the whole map now. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Below us, the street moved. Somewhere in that city, her brother's agency was running campaigns for 3 different brands from a floor I owned. Somewhere, my father-in-law was tending tomatoes. Somewhere, the version of me that her family had decided was a footnote had already been replaced by something they were all still learning to read. None of it required an announcement. I just waited until the silence was mine to break. And then I broke it.